welcome back to another episode of Blu-Ray Boutique. I'm your co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And I'm your other co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And today on the podcast, we will be highlighting two films directed by Leo McCarey and starring Bing Crosby. Those movies are Going My Way from 1944 and The Bells of St. Mary's from 1945. Both of them are musical comedy dramas, and Going My Way won the Oscar for Best Picture in its year. So, in addition to a number of other awards. So, these were both your picks, Tim, and I am curious as we get started with our discussion, had you seen either of these movies before, or more broadly, had you seen any Bing Crosby movies before?
I had seen Going My Way. I had not seen Bells of St. Mary's. As I might have mentioned on here, I'm going through all the Best Picture winners. So Going My Way, I probably saw, I don't know, around 7-8 years ago. And then, yeah, I've seen a handful of Crosby films. I mean, obviously, White Christmas is a seasonal one for a lot of people. I have watched, it's sort of the film that sort of preceded it, Holiday Inn, and I'm sure I've seen other things that have actually starred him that I'm not thinking of. I enjoy Bing Crosby. Had you had tons of experience with him?
I'd had no experience with him outside of his music. So
Wow.
This was my introduction to his acting. I know, shame on me. There's a lot of his movies that I should have seen, including some of the ones that you mentioned, as well as apparently Ichabod and Mr. Toad. I didn't know he's a voice in that, but he is. So yeah, I had not seen any of his movies, and I was interested to see, kind of to take a dive into those. Since you had seen some of his movies before, including one of these, what was it that drew you to these two in particular?
I just feel like, during the holiday season, feel-good films tend to be the genres people tend to go to a lot. And I knew, having seen the Going My Way before, I knew that it was a feel-good film, and that, from what I was led to believe, Bells of St. Mary's was the same. So I just felt like it would be good to kind of end the year on these two films on a kind of brighter, more optimistic note.
Yeah, and certainly a contrast from our previous podcast, which was all about Twin Peaks: The Return. So if you're listening to these in sequence and in short order, I hope you don't get whiplash. But, we have a lot of broad tastes over here in these parts. So thank you, Tim, for allowing us to be introduced to, or allowing me to be introduced to these. And, for any listeners out there that have not seen these movies, they are both available on Blu-ray, which is why we're covering them on this podcast. And I believe that Bells of St. Mary's is also streaming on Tubi TV if you don't have immediate access to the Blu-ray. So just a nice thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, Going My Way is available through Shout Factory, and Bells of St. Mary's is available through Olive Signature, which I think the broad name for that company is Olive Films. Website olivefilms.com. You can't order stuff directly from their website, but I think there are links to places where you can get their stuff. But yeah, so it's two different companies, but I think both came out in the past few years, so they're pretty up to date.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's two different distributors, but then I was looking at, some of the production notes, and it makes sense, I guess, because Going My Way was a Paramount production, I believe, and then Bells of St. Mary was with RKO, so that may be why maybe different companies owned the rights. Let's go ahead and dive right into the first of these two movies, which is Going My Way. So as previously mentioned, this came out in 1944. And despite it being nominally at least a holiday picture, it actually came out in May of that year, or at least that's when it premiered. And then it had a bigger run starting in August. So not a movie that came out in the Christmas time period, but certainly, touches on some of those themes. There are a few holiday scenes in this one. And it's directed by Leo McCarey. If that name sounds familiar to you, he's also known for quite a few other movies, including the Marx Brothers Duck Soup, which has a slightly different tone, I'll say, than these. He also did An Affair to Remember, The Awful Truth, Make Way for Tomorrow, and a long list of other movies throughout the 30s and 40s, as well as up into, I believe his last films were possibly in the 50s. So he had a nice lengthy career, and these movies kind of came in the midpoint of his career when he was really making some more socially conscious and somewhat religious films. He's a deeply religious man himself, was Catholic, and these two films both take place in that setting. So, Going My Way, like I said, it was in 1944, which was quite an interesting time, for the world. We were in the midst of World War II. Lots of atrocities were coming out about concentration camps. The Nazis were a real threat. There were, just if you look up 1944 in history, it's
Mhm.
just a long series of atrocities, right? Like it's pretty depressing. So I think there must have been an appetite for something completely different. And this movie certainly offers that. So the story is Bing Crosby plays a young priest named Chuck O'Malley, Father Francis or Father Charles Chuck O'Malley, and he has transferred to a church in New York City from his original home in St. Louis. And he's a young guy. He has a lot of newfangled ideas that the current priest isn't quite so sure about. The current priest is Father Fitzgibbon, played by Barry Fitzgerald, and you might know him from Bringing Up Baby or How Green Was My Valley. But he's a very traditional guy, and of course, Father Chuck is, he has his golf clubs and he has his fishing gear, and he sings and plays the piano, and he just has a lot of new ideas that aren't necessarily in keeping with what Father Fitzgibbon would prefer. There's also a number of other interesting characters, including Carol James, who's a young woman that ran away from home. She's played by Jean Heather. And then, of course, there's also a lovely lady who likes to be sort of the town gossip, Mrs. Quimp, and she was played by Anita Sharp Bolster. So we have this great cast of characters, and this is a movie that I will say kind of takes its time, eases you in. It is not fast paced, so don't expect that,
No.
but it is a nice relaxed paced movie about a man who's slowly trying to mix things up and perhaps bring the church into, more modern times, reach out to the people at their level, and, kind of slowly but surely change things from the inside. And there's not a ton of plot other than the church is about to be foreclosed upon.
Now, Father, here's my business. You owe the Knickerbocker Savings and Loan Company 5 payments on this mortgage. And if they're not taken care of, I'm afraid the Knickerbocker Savings and Loan Company will have to take the necessary action. Huh? Why don't you make that the subject of your sermon next Sunday? Tell it to your people. The Lord loveth the cheerful giver.
Oh, I can imagine myself saying that at Mass next Sunday. What a sermon that'd be, Mr. Haynes. The text of my sermon this morning is taken from the mortgage, according to Mr. Haynes. From the 1st to the 23rd clause. Stay done, you know.
Oh, but that's your business. Keep it bright, huh? No, but seriously, Father, we've made a bad loan, and we want our money back.
Well, you'll get it somehow.
And so they're trying to figure out ways to raise money or to stop that from happening. So that's sort of a plot machination that goes through, but honestly, that kind of falls into the background for a lot of it. And it's really just more interactions between Father O'Malley, Father Fitzgibbon, and some of the parishioners. So, with all of that said, you had watched this movie before. Was it something that you appreciated at the time you watched it? And how did that change as you watched it this time?
I believe my remembering my original review of it, I think my views on it were mixed, and I was curious how I would feel going into it now. And from what I remember, I think my main complaint the first time I watched it was that I thought it had a lot of nice pieces and side plots and all that stuff that didn't quite maybe mesh together as well as it could for an overall film. Oddly enough, the watching it this time, I didn't really have that problem. But what I did find was something that you alluded to was I did find it, and in some cases painfully so, I did find it very slow paced. And, obviously you don't expect a film like this to be, well, fast paced necessarily, but I did feel like I guess my particular problem with it was even as kind of a slow paced, kind of low stakes, slow drama film, it just I felt like it lacked a little bit of oomph.
Yeah, so that was sort of my feeling as well, is that I really wish that this had tighter editing. And that's partly, watching this with 2022 eyes. But at the same time, I've watched a lot of movies from the 1940s. I know that they can be faster paced. In fact, 1944 also gave us Double Indemnity and Laura and Gaslight and, all of these kind of classic movies, and To Have and Have Not. And so this is just such a different pace and a different tone. And the other thing, again, I mentioned this was a year where the world was in an uproar, but at the same time, this movie just has absolutely zero connection to that. And in some ways, that makes it feel almost more strange and disconnected. Like it doesn't acknowledge any of that stuff.
Well, I would say any. One
Okay,
point.
well, very little. I mean,
Yeah.
there's somebody who goes off and joins the Air Force, so sure.
Yeah.
But it it needed a little more edge for me, I think. Frank Capra is often accused of doing like sentimental pictures, but his movies always have at least a little bit of an edge or a little bit of like, irreverence to them. And this one absolutely does not. So, your mileage may vary, I guess, depending on what you're looking for in a movie. I didn't hate it, but I was definitely wishing for a little bit more something.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem too is that, I love the fact that Bing Crosby's character is so optimistic and hopeful, and he sees the best in people and he tries to help with big gestures and little gestures, and he's often pushing Father Fitzgibbons, no, let's try to help. Like, for example, Carol, that character played by Jean Heather, has run away from home, and he tries to push for let's try to help her in ways that we can and stuff. Or let's try to help, this one older woman from being evicted from her apartment or whatever, even though the church doesn't really have any money and all this stuff. So I like that, but because he's so, not to say he doesn't make mistakes, he kind of maybe steps in it a few times by bumbling with this and maybe not making a good first impression with Father Fitzgibbons. He's very traditional and stuff like that. But he's pretty perfect, and because he's pretty much just optimistic and hopeful all the time, there needs to maybe be something a little bit more to his character for him to have a better, I think, grip on the audience.
Yeah, I mean, so I was reminded watching this of Lilies of the Field, which we covered on an earlier podcast this year, where Sidney Poitier, comes and helps these nuns to build a church. And there's a similar thread running through of like an outsider who's challenging the very traditional ways of doing things. And, this person with a heart of gold helps out. But at least in that film, there was more conflict to jump onto. And like you could see the back and forth, and there was a little bit of character growth. In this, I'm not sure, besides Father Fitzgibbon, like I don't know if anybody really has character growth. You know what I mean? And so it just has a very odd feel to it in that way, where it feels artificial and it doesn't feel necessarily grounded in reality. And again, maybe that's what people at the time really wanted and needed, and maybe that's why it won the Academy Award. But for me, I was, I guess, expecting something that would at least pay some sort of tribute to what was going on at the time and like acknowledge it in some way. And this is almost like too far removed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the point of it was that this young priest is going to come in and kind of help people with their problems, and he'll be kind of the rock of this new kind of church community and stuff. And it's the characters that are it's a handful of characters around him who he's helping. He helps form a boys choir to help kind of keep some kids out of trouble. He helps Jean Heather maybe see, with her singing career and kind of maybe have her a better view on her relationship with her parents.
Why don't you go back home?
I tell you, at home my life is intolerable.
Parents?
We don't agree on anything. I don't like the way I do my hair, my eyebrows, too much lipstick, something or other. They even object to my boyfriends. And if they do let me go out, they say, "Where are you going? Come home early. Come right home after the show."
No drive-in.
And no matter how early I get in, it's too late. And if I say we ran out of gas, they say I'm lying.
Are you?
Sometimes.
Of course, there might be two sides to it. Maybe you're being a little unreasonable.
I'm 18.
18, huh? As old as that? When I was 18, I thought my father was pretty dumb. After a while, when I got to be 21, I was amazed to find out how much he learned in 3 years.
the two people from who have loaned the church money or done whatever and are looking to collect. Those two characters, played by James Brown and Gene Lockhart, those characters kind of, Gene Lockhart especially, is less greedy by the end of it, and it is something that you see, Frank Capra do much better in his films and some of his stuff, like You Can't Take It With You or what have you. Then Barry Fitzgerald and Bing Crosby are kind of the highlight of the film, though don't have as much screen time as I remember them having. I remember them kind of just being about them and stuff, and they don't really get as much screen time. So I think some of it is, partially the problem is maybe that they are bopping around so much that they don't have as much time maybe to develop certain things that you would want, beyond just the fact that maybe it could use more bite to it. It's just they're not letting certain stuff develop as much as you would want them to.
Yeah, I would love to see a different kind of cut or version of this where we do have more time with Father Fitzgibbon and Father Chuck, because it's fun to see those two kind of spar and their different approaches to things.
I don't think you understand, Father. She's a singer.
Well, now. And where, may I ask, are you expecting to find employment? In some nice, cool, airy nightclub, I suppose. Any prospect?
Well, no, not exactly.
And you're willing to starve rather than push a broom.
You have a home, I presume.
Oh, she just left it, Father.
Then go right back to your parents. A fine little girl like you singing someplace like the Blue Goose or something.
But you've got to start someplace, Father.
Nonsense. Being a good wife and a mother is a good enough start for you. Like your own mother.
A movie that came out in 2019 that I'm sure you watched because it was nominated for a bunch of Oscars was The Two Popes. And that really is just, two guys walking around talking about their different philosophies about life and religion and charity. And that movie was fascinating and compelling, even though it's just conversations between these two deeply devout men who have just very different views on the world. And it would have been interesting to see, some kind of early echo of that here. And I feel like there's a little bit of that, but that's not where the story is interested in going. And that's fine. Like, I can't wish for this to be a different movie than it is. But yeah, I think Barry Fitzgerald, honestly, was the standout for me as Father Fitzgibbon. He just does such a great job of making you empathize with the guy who's ostensibly supposed to be the one that's kind of the curmudgeon. But by the end, you're really rooting for him and seeing things from his point of view, even if you don't always agree with his, way of doing things. And I really enjoyed the way that character had a real journey to go on, unlike some of the other characters in the story.
Yeah, he is the highlight of it. I mean, just hearing him talk is just great. And he's grouchy and traditional and reserved, but also has a playfulness to him and kind of almost a childlike nature to him at times and stuff, both in good ways in terms of just being a bit, I feel like he would be the person who would play practical jokes and then just giggle to himself.
Right.
And the result. And then, in bad ways too, where he kind of throws fits and tantrums and literally runs away from the church, and then he has to be brought back home in the rain and stuff. So, but it's all very endearing and stuff. And it should be said that Barry Fitzgerald is the only actor for this movie. He was nominated for both Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. And before the next ceremony, the Oscars had made a new rule so that couldn't happen again. He did win the Oscar for Best Supporting. I want to say Bing Crosby won for Best Actor for this one.
What did you think about the music in this movie?
Okay, so we'll probably touch on this in the next one as well. So Bing Crosby films, I will say, I don't know how much of his music you've heard that has come from movies, but he usually, for the movies I've seen of his, has better material to work with. Then that's because I don't know why. I mean, Leo McCarey worked on something like Duck Soup, which doesn't have wonderful songs either, but I think they're still better and more memorable than most of the ones in this movie. And it's just, they're so like lackluster, and just like the title song, Going My Way, is done okay by Bing Crosby, who sings it.
This road leads to Rainbowville, going my way. Up ahead is Bluebird Hill, going my way. Just pack a basket full of wishes, and off you start with Sunday morning in your heart.
And then later, another character sings her own kind of slightly more operatic version of it, which I think is not very good.
This road leads to Rainbowville, going my way. Up ahead is Bluebird Hill, going my way. Just pack a basket full of wishes, and off you'll start with Sunday morning in your heart.
But yeah, I mean, I'm actually having trouble remembering some of the songs. The only other one I can actually remember is the song that people out there would probably know the most, even if they don't know that it came from this movie originally, which is the Animal song.
I think the name of the
Oh.
song is actually
Swinging on a
Swinging on
Star.
a Star.
Yeah. So Swinging on a Star, that is probably it's the best one in there. I do enjoy that song quite a bit. It's quite fun. Bing Crosby sings it primarily, but he has backup singers from the boys' choir, and then some of the boys in the choir sing verses as well. It's this nice little song where he goes through different animals and stuff like that, and it's a lot of fun.
Or would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar, and be better off than you are? Or would you rather be a mule? A mule is an animal with long, funny ears, kicks up at anything he hears.
His back is brawny and his brain is weak. He's just plain stupid with a stubborn streak.
And by the way, if you hate to go to school, you may grow up to be a mule.
Or would you like to swing on a star, carry moonbeams home in a jar, and be better off than you are?
Or would you rather be a pig?
But actually, I'm looking at the other ones now because I'm on the page for that. And most of these, I mean, some of these are just songs I think they sing like at the church or whatever. I guess Three Blind Mice is one, sort of. They have Irish Lullaby in there, but that's just something, I don't know. I mean, some of these I barely even count as songs. But when I watched it originally with my wife of 7 or 8 years ago, we kind of had come to the conclusion that it's technically a musical, but it's more like a movie that happens to have songs in it.
Right.
Because it doesn't really, even by the standard of having a movie where there's an excuse for the songs, and they're really singing songs in the reality of the movie, which could be done fine. Again, Gold Diggers of 1933 does that, and it does it wonderfully, and there's many other films that have done that do that very well. But here, it just, I don't know, it almost just feels like the people writing the songs were, I don't know, they weren't talented enough to write good songs, or their heart wasn't in it, because they're very disappointing and forgettable for the most part.
Well, I was very underwhelmed by everything except for the mule song. And I was shocked to see that Swinging on a Star beat out the Trolley song for Meet Me in St. Louis to win Best Song at the Academy Awards that year, because the Trolley song is fantastic. And having this movie come out the same year as Meet Me in St. Louis, one of these things is not like the others. Like, that one has some real catchy songs. And of course, Judy Garland is a big reason for that, but it's just they're better written. It's like more peppy and fun. These are like, I mean, you could fall asleep with these songs on, and that's not necessarily a compliment. So sorry to Bing Crosby, but man, oh man.
Well, no, I mean, his singing is still great in it. You still
I know, but he was not given good material.
No, yeah, he's not giving good material.
I don't think I can hum any of these songs.
Like, I mean, and Holiday and White Christmas.
Blind Mice, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, both Holiday and obviously White Christmas have the White Christmas song, which is favorite around the holidays and stuff, and one of the best known Christmas songs ever. And there's other songs in both those movies. So, you know, other Bing Crosby movies fared a lot better. I'm sure there's some that fared worse too, but they a lot of other ones that fared better in terms of songs. Then they also had, you know, White Christmas was written by Irving Berlin, so I mean, they had much, I think, just more solid writers behind them. I mean, I don't think any of the people for this, I don't know any of their names, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be bad, but I don't know. I just feel like they should have picked. I don't know why Bing Crosby like would agree like, oh yes, these songs are okay.
Right.
So I think he would be smarter than that unless they just forced it on him. I don't know, but yeah, the songs are just disappointing to say this. I will say they do have. I don't know if this really counts, but they do have because one of his at one point, Father Chuck he runs into a old friend of his who she is now doing opera at the Metropolitan.
Yes.
Western Market, and we see a little bit of her doing Carmen, which that was nice. I'm not a big
Yeah.
opera dude, but Carmen's a classic, obviously, and that was nice to see.
The actress that plays the opera singer was a real opera singer.
Reese
Risa
Stevens.
Stevens
Oh,
is her
right.
name.
Yeah.
And yeah, she did go on to be one of the biggest or best known Carmens of that time period. So that's kind of cool. But even that, I felt like this was, it just felt like weird things were strung together that didn't necessarily make sense as one big story. It was just like, oh, we know this person. Like, how can we get them in here? And then it would just be like, okay, you get like a 5-minute scene for no reason. I don't know. It just like,
Yeah.
it was very, it didn't feel super well planned out. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I complained in my review about it. I get what they're doing. They're having all these little pieces that kind of come together at the end with the boys' choir, and then his famous friend who sings opera and stuff. Another priest who has a parish not too far away in New York City. Father Timothy O'Dowd, played by character actor Frank McHugh, and stuff. And they all kind of come together in a way at the end to kind of help the church and all that. So I see what they're trying to do, or set up all these little subplots that come together. But yeah, it doesn't really come together in the way that you would hope. And I think I had made the comparison that the film is kind of in a strange way, kind of like a Marx Brothers film, in that a Marx Brothers film, at least the first five that they did, the last of which that was Duck Soup that Leo McCarey did. Those first five that they did are much less focused on plots and more just focused on funny and having a lot of anarchy and all that stuff. And the plots and the love stories are kind of just secondary to the jokes and the funny lines and dialogue and all that stuff. And I feel like that this, strangely enough, I think Going My Way is kind of like that, except instead of funny being, and there was humor in this, but instead of funny being the thing that they care about over the plot, it's just a lot of it's feel good moments that they care about more, and they
Right.
care more about putting those in there, which I understand and I think is fine. I mean, I'm not saying a movie has to have a strong plot. I mean, we talked for about 5 hours about the Before trilogy, which have
Of course.
some of the loosest plots of anything I think we've talked about. But yeah, it just doesn't. It needs, I think, both in terms of the writing of the songs and the script, it just needs more like rewriting and more editing to make it a sharper, more cohesive thing.
I also wonder about the writing of this movie and, how much of it was changed because, one of the other Academy Awards that this won, which I think is a little bit of a travesty if I'm being honest, is for writing. And I don't think it's particularly well written and certainly does not hold a candle to Double Indemnity, Gaslight, Laura, or Meet Me in St. Louis, which all lost to this movie and this script. Oscar's gonna Oscar, but at the same time, I look at this and I'm like, really? You read this and you thought, yeah, that's better than Double Indemnity.
I hate to knock it because it's pretty harmless, and I feel like we're being very mean to it. But I started liking it, and I thought I would like it so much more this time around and stuff. But yeah, in some ways, I liked it less. I think if you need a light film or a pick me up, it might be a good thing for you. But it's just, yeah, it doesn't work quite as well as like as a Frank Capra film or whatever in terms of being uplifting. Again, just because the energy isn't quite where it should be.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be mean to it either. I'm sure it gave a lot of people hope at a time that they needed it. And if that's the case, then that's great. And I did think that the ending, and we won't give it away, but I thought the ending was very touching.
Oh yeah, I mean, I
Uh,
teared up. I think this time and the first time I watched it.
yeah, for sure. Because I wasn't expecting that thing to happen. That happens, and it goes on a bit long. It's a little bit slow, but it's completely inoffensive. If you need a movie to watch with grandma and grandpa, or if you're like me and your mom doesn't like movies very much, but you need something to put on, like
Then
she'd
watch
probably be
Eraserhead.
okay with
God
that.
damn it! No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly, right. But yeah, it's a nice movie. It's just maybe not a movie I'm going to go back to over and over again.
Okay, so for our next and final film, we're having the sequel, and really in name and character only, The Bells of St. Mary's. Again, also directed by Leo McCarey. Bing Crosby does come back as Father Chuck O'Malley. He's the only returning character. It should be said this is a totally standalone film. This makes absolutely no reference to the events of Going My Way. So if you want to watch this one, you can. So Father Chuck I guess has a problem keeping a parish or something, because he's been transferred yet again to a school, a Catholic school run by some nuns. He is going to be the new head of the school, and the head of the nuns is Sister Mary Benedict, played by Ingrid Bergman. And again, the kind of like the church and Going My Way, the school is struggling a little bit. They were hoping to expand the school at some point, but they had to sell some of the property to help update the building for like fire codes and all that stuff. And they had to sell part of the property to a Horace P. Bargadus, played by Henry Travers. In this, he's really kind of the antagonist, not terribly villainous, but is greedy and wants to get the remaining property of the school so he can for his business and stuff. And he's already building a property on where they were hoping to build the new school. He's building a business, and he's hoping to buy the school so he can tear it down and have it used as a parking lot. And Bing Crosby is trying to help with that in terms of helping Sister Mary convince Horace to give up the property that he's already bought for the school so they can build new property and stuff. And that's basically it. And it's pretty much just some fun shenanigans with other students, one of which is coming to the school for the first time. A girl is, and Father Chuck is also trying to help that little girl's mother, trying to help her in the school do well in class and stuff, while at the same time helping her mother find her long lost father. And funny stuff ensues, feel good stuff ensues, and all that. Again, pretty light in plot. I would say even probably lighter than Going My Way. So because we were so down on Going My Way for a lot of it, I do want to start on a positive for The Bells of St. Mary's. In the same way that I think Barry Fitzgerald was the highlight of Going My Way, Ingrid Bergman, I think, is the highlight of this film.
1,000%.
And I love her in this movie. She does great with the dramatic stuff, the humor. She's hilarious. There's a great scene where two boys get in a fight. Two of the boys of the school get in a fight, and Father Chuck goes to talk to one of them, who I think is the instigator of the fight. And then Sister Mary goes to talk with the other boy who kind of lost the fight and stuff. And the boy talks to her about, like, I turned the other cheek and blah blah blah, which frustrated my wife. Because she's like, no, fight back. Darn
yes.
I mean, she understood it, but at the same time, anyway. And at first, Sister Mary's kind of like, yeah, okay. And then she kind of feels bad where, the point of view the boy has about the other boys, I don't think look fondly on him and all this stuff. So she starts to think, and with one of the other nuns, she goes to a bookstore or something. She tries to find a book about boxing from a famous boxer who I think was a real boxer, though didn't really write this book. And she reads it overnight, and then the next day starts boxing lessons with the kid and stuff. And what ensues is just a great, funny scene where she's trying to teach him boxing, and she actually gets kind of clipped a little bit at one point. And it's really sweet and really funny. And just overall, that's just kind of her character, and she's so endearing as a character. I mean, helped tremendously by just Ingrid Bergman being so just you want to like her, I think, in most of the stuff she's in and stuff. And we had talked about her a couple months ago as we record this anyway, a couple months ago in October we talked about her in Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. And obviously, she was in Casablanca not too long before this film and all that stuff. But this film, I've always liked Ingrid Bergman. Had no problems with her. I liked her in the stuff I've seen her in, which sadly isn't very much. And it should be said she won an Oscar the year previous for this for Gaslight. But watching this film, it was the first time that I really kind of realized I think I even said it out loud. I was like, my God, Ingrid Bergman's a great actress.
Yeah.
She's so good in this movie. And I love her to death. I mean, I think out of both films, she is far and away the highlight, and I could almost wish that they had a spinoff where she goes off to a different place, and we have a Sister Mary movie or something, because she's just so wonderful.
She was absolutely the highlight for me too, and I'm so glad you mentioned the boxing scene, because I was cheering and laughing and loving it, and she breathes so much life into this character of Sister Mary Benedict, who, how many times have we seen a mother superior or a sister who's the head of a school, and she's just stern and mean and unlikable, and then slowly you find out there's some backstory. Not like that at all here. She's likable from the outset, even though she's a little stricter than Father O'Malley. She's just, she has the kid's best interest at heart. She clearly cares. And so the two of them, rather than being foils of one another, just make a great team.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved seeing the way that they interacted with the kids. And I also want to point out, I think the kid actors in this movie are a lot stronger and more plentiful. I mean, they're younger.
And it focuses more on them too.
Yeah, but the kids that they got for this movie were all very believable. There's a great scene where the first graders are rehearsing a play of the Nativity, and I laughed so much during that. And I was like, I think they really just let cameras roll and told the kids to do whatever, because the kids seem very plausibly like they're making it up as they go along. And it's fantastic.
Well, here we all are in the stables, and we're very happy here in Bethlehem. And there's our star. Here's our angel. There are the shepherds. And here are the wise men there, and there. And all here, and the neighbors are coming in, bringing their presents, because it's his birthday. You make Mary and I very happy.
What do you do now, Bobby? Sing Holy Night, perhaps?
No, Father. We have another song.
Oh, how's it go?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jesus. Happy birthday to you.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because my wife had the same theory. I watched this with her. She basically said the same thing, which she almost felt like they had just let them do whatever, because it is so, I mean, we have a child that is almost in first grade. She's a kindergartner. And so we could very much identify with these kids who I'm sure were in and around that age group. They very much act like first graders. It never feels false, like an adult is writing kids or whatever, which they might have, for all I know. This could have been very all scripted, and I don't know. Leo McCarey just might be very good at working with kids. I don't know. But yeah, that scene was one of the highlights.
This one also, it just overall, even though it's still not super fast paced, it moved lighter on its feet, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt more real. So I think that's part of it, right? Like there's still some fanciful things, but I think overall it felt more real. The characters felt like there was a little bit more at stake. And there were also just these great moments of humor that I loved. Like there's a scene in the very beginning that I don't want to totally spoil, but I'll just say it involves a kitten, and I love cats, as you know, and I know you do too. I was like on the floor with laughter. I just loved it. And my cats, by the way, were watching with me, and I don't know if they loved it or not, but I was like, yeah, I love this movie already. It gave me such a good, warm feeling. And so I'm happy to say that I think I could see myself returning to this one as a holiday favorite. And it also has, even though the songs are still not amazing, some actual holiday songs in it that I think, people will recognize.
Before we get too far away from the beginning of what you were saying, I wonder if part of the reason you liked it more, and I do agree that I think this one has less of a problem with pacing. I think it still could be tighter, but I think it does a better job with that, which maybe is partially because I hadn't seen this one before. I don't know. But I wonder one reason why you like it, maybe one reason why I like it more too. It's interesting. I think Father O'Malley in this is kind of interesting. He's a double-edged thing where I think found him more frustrating at certain points. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
decisions he makes are really just bad decisions. Like one of his first things he does when he gets there is letting the kids just off for the day.
See, when we were kids, we used to just live for holidays. We should never get too far away from our childhood.
Do you realize what you've done? These children are liable to get into mischief. And the responsibility is yours.
Well, it seemed like a good idea.
But you can't call a holiday just like that. You have to get the permission of the superintendent of schools. What will we tell him?
Well, I'll call him. There's a man that really needs a holiday. I may give him the day off.
He just doesn't get it, and he butts in with trying to find the father without asking the wife. He just decides to butt into that.
Yeah.
And he just makes certain decisions. And then there's one big decision having to do with one of the main characters. It's kind of in the driving force near the end of the film, which is kind of just like, I think my wife was ready to kind of slap him because it's like, why are you? No, this is obviously not the right decision. Ignore the person who's advising you to do this. This is stupid. But I think one of the good things about that is it does show him, not necessarily the earlier decisions I mentioned, but that final decision he has to make, and when he eventually decides to do at the end of the film, I think does give him, I think, a bit of a more conflict and more of a flaw where he doesn't necessarily make the right decision at first. And he has to learn that, oh no, this other choice is the better one. So I think that it gives him, he's less perfect and stuff. In some ways, I think unintentional, and in some ways, I think very much intentional. He's more fallible and stuff. So while some cases I got very frustrated with him, he is a bit more of an interesting character, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I liked that he had some flaws for sure, because same here, like that point that you're talking about, which we won't talk about exactly, but we're talking around it. I was like, come on, buddy. Like, just no, that's the wrong decision to make. And then even like one of the things he does early on is it seemed like he basically like sort of wrote a paper for a student that was struggling. And I wasn't sure if that was the right call either, although it ended up being kind of fine. But
I think that was almost unintentional because when I think realizes with Sister Mary or something, when the student is doing the paper or the presentation or whatever, I think he partially realizes, oh crap, I accidentally wrote this for her, when originally it was just like, I'll help her out, give her some ideas and stuff. And I will say the payoff to that is very funny.
Oh, totally.
Where she keeps, I think Mary looks back at him a couple times and he does the kind of, I think, the whistling thing where it's like, like whatever. But it's a very good version of that, probably the best I've seen. And it's a great interplay between them, and it's a funny scene. But yeah, it does show kind of, I mean, just the fact that he doesn't really know how to deal with, I mean, he can deal fine with kids and he likes kids, but he doesn't really know how to help run a school at this point. So I think having that is a good thing. He kind of knows how to run a church, and he has good ideas in Going My Way and stuff, and those are fine. But he doesn't, like, a Catholic school is different from a Catholic church. And yeah, I like that they had that element to him. Yeah, so the songs in this, I feel, in my opinion anyway, though I do think the title song, Bells of St. Mary's, even though I don't remember much of it, I think was kind of nice, and I like that a little bit.
Oh, bells of St. Mary's, we always will love you with your inspiration. We never will fail. Your chimes will forever bring sweet memories of you. So proudly ring out while we sing out, Hail, hail, hail.
I think are even worse than Going My Way.
Really?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. Especially since there's not much opportunity in terms of story because there isn't a boys' choir or anything. So
Right.
there's less. He's not writing. He hasn't has the song. So they have to kind of the ways they put songs in this mostly just feel very artificial. Like, oh, we need a song in here because it's technically musical. So let's kind of write a loose, kind of bad segue into a song and stuff. Where it's a lot like I mean the thing both St. Mary's one. It's just the sisters have singing a song and he walks into the room and he decides to sing the song and stuff. So it, the excuses for songs wasn't as strong. But then also I just felt like I just felt like they were so lackluster, and it felt like they were putting so little effort into them that it just I would honestly rather this just not have any songs in it at all because it just felt like they were so underwhelming and just blah. It was almost not even, and they had so little focus and energy. I just felt like it wasn't even worth it at that point.
Well, it's saying something that apparently in 1945, Aren't You Glad You're You was in the Billboard charts for 9 weeks and it hit number 8. Whereas today, our number 8 song, well, okay, according to Billboard, it actually is the Christmas song by Nat King Cole, which I guess they're going by streams. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely different things today on the charts than were on the charts back then typically. So
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. I agree with you that they're still not super memorable, but I guess I was happy to hear like "O Come All Ye Faithful" and
Mm-hmm.
some of those others that at least were recognizable to me and felt a little bit more tuneful than the ones in the previous movie.
It should be said that this one, Going My Way, was the top grossing film of 1944, just above Meet Me in St. Louis. And then in 1945, Velvet St. Mary's did even better with another extra 1,500, 1,200, or sorry, million. But oddly enough, is not. I will say this overall. In some ways, a lot of ways I do like this film more, but in some ways it does feel. I get why people remember Going My Way more in some cases because Velvet St. Mary's doesn't feel as fresh and stuff, and I could see why. I tried to look up reasons why these didn't have any more sequels and stuff, and they just did the two, and I couldn't really find any information on it. Watching this one, I could kind of see why. I could see this formula getting, unless you really wanted to spice things up, I could see it getting old kind of quickly.
I see what you mean about the formula kind of wearing thin, and it still has the problem of certain characters having a change of heart basically because the script needs them to, not because of there's a real organic reason for it to happen. So, I do think that it was gonna need some sort of upping of the stakes if it was gonna continue. But I don't know. I still think this is a very, if you want to call it a sequel, it's a very worthwhile sequel. And I really think, again, like you said, you could watch this as a standalone. You wouldn't be missing anything unless you super really love the Bing Crosby character and you want to go back and see, what he was like in the other movie.
Overall, this movie is in a lot of ways better. Ingrid Bergman is just absolutely. I mean, just thinking about her in this movie and her character and all the stuff she does, I feel happier
Yeah.
and stuff. She's just so wonderful, and it makes me want to go watch more of her stuff, which again I've seen shockingly very little of. And just I think if you've only, especially if you've only seen her maybe in more, I mean, she has some humorous moments in Notorious. She might have some humorous moments in Casablanca. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but so it's not like she's always this kind of dour and serious person. But I think a lot of her maybe more well-known stuff, like Gaslight or whatever, or the more serious films and more serious performances. This is a chance for you to see just how well-rounded of an actress and how eclectic and just all the different things she's capable of doing, and she's just capable of being this fun, light character who can also at the turn of drop of a hat break your heart. And it's just yeah.
Yeah.
I can't stop gushing about it. She's so
Oh,
good.
she's so good. And she had an amazing year because the previous year she was in Gaslight, as we mentioned, and then this year she had not only this movie, but she also starred in Spellbound, with directed by Alfred Hitchcock, which was also nominated for a bunch of stuff. So she had a really amazing run right here. And we're really just seeing her at the peak of her game. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't, to see more of her stuff, and especially definitely check out, I think she's fantastic in Spellbound too. So it might be a fun one for you to follow up on if you're interested in doing a double feature that only has the thing in common that it's her two movies from 1945.
Are there other movies kind of in the same vein of her doing lighter performances that you know of that you would recommend?
That's a great question. I mean, off the top of my head, Casablanca does come to mind because I do think there's humor in that movie, although I don't know that she's doing the bulk of the heavy lifting when it comes to the humor in Casablanca. But I think she has a sort of knowingness that works well in that movie. Murder on the Orient Express, she does get a little bit of something to do in that movie, is kind of just a kind of fun one.
That's
The original, not the
the
remake, I
the
should point out.
the one with the guy who plays Perot, an actor I like
Albert Finney.
Albert Finney, yeah. Which
Yeah.
I actually have only seen a little bit of that version, but yeah.
It's a fun version, and it has like Lauren Bacall and Jacqueline Bisset and John Gielgud. Like, there's a ton of people in it that make it worth seeing. So if you're looking for a nice little distraction, that could be a fun one.
I do love murder mysteries.
By the way, one other movie that I haven't seen, but I believe it is a comedy because it's with Walter Matthau, and that's usually what he did. It's called Cactus Flower, and that came out in 1969. So a little bit later, but it looks like she does get to be funny in that movie as well.
Okay, well, I do love Walter Matthau, so I might have to look that one up. Yeah.
Also stars Goldie Hawn, so yeah.
Going My Way beat out movies like Gaslight and Double Indemnity for Best Picture. Then the movie that won, I noted in my review of this other film that I found it funny that the first movie, the winner of Best Picture for 1945, which was awarded in 1946, so after the war is over, you might think they might pick a nice happy film and stuff. Hey, at the end of the war, nice uplifting film. But no, they pick Lost Weekend, which is one of the most
yeah, of course,
the darkest movies you could pick and stuff, and which beat out Bells of St. Mary's, which was nominated for Best Picture as well, but didn't win. So I just find that funny. That I think I mean, it's interesting that obviously there were happy movies made during more prosperous, peaceful times. There were really dark as hell movies made during dark times and stuff. I'm not saying that isn't the case, but I think it's interesting that during the war you have a lot of war movies and a lot of dramatic war movies and serious war movies and in some cases really depressing war movies. But there's a message of hope in a lot of them, or something like a Great Depression film like Grapes of Wrath, which I haven't seen, sadly. I know has in the end a message of hope in there. And then after the war, you have your favorite genre where film noirs are really blossoming post-war and stuff. You have, instead of going with the happy stuff, it's like we're happy and more prosperous now after the war. The war's finally over, but yet cinema now is going darker. So it's almost like, the films that are popular are the polar opposite of the times that they're in. Like it's the times are happier, so we can do the more depressing stuff. That's also in response to the war and maybe some people having a more cynical look on the world, so we can do stuff like film wars and stuff, and those can really succeed and stuff. So yeah, I just think there wasn't as much of a need for these types of films post war and stuff. I think there's always a need for them in some way, but I think there wasn't as much of a need for them, which is maybe why they kind of just quietly stopped doing them. But I don't know. I mean, maybe one more, especially if there was somebody else behind the director's chair, might have been interesting. But I find it surprising they stopped at 2, but I'm kind of happy that they did. So
it's especially surprising because they made so much money with the first 2 that they would stop. And yet, maybe again, like maybe Leo McCarey was interested in moving on to other topics, or I don't know, but just going back quickly to like during the war, we wanted one thing, and after the war, we wanted something different. You also have to think about like who was going to the movies during 1944, 1945, and who wasn't. So, during that time, a lot of the men in the households, and of course I'm generalizing a lot, but a lot of the men in the households were off, overseas. And so who was probably driving the box office is probably women, right? Like women and their families. And then the men come back from war and they've seen bloodshed. They've held their best friend as he died. Like they've killed people. maybe they're not quite feeling like the fun and fuzzy movies because it just doesn't resonate with what they've seen and experienced, right? So now, like, they need something that's a little darker to speak to their experience because that's the humanity that they've lived. So I wonder if that was an element of it as well.
Yeah, and maybe some. Yeah, I agree. I think that might have been. I would think that might be an element too, and maybe in terms of these, I mean, see, we don't want to stereotype, but I'm sure film moguls at the time and studio heads would stereotype in terms of, well, the men are back. Let's have some grisly, greasy, tough, hairy men punching and shooting at each other and
Right,
stuff
exactly.
because the men are back and stuff. Even though obviously with our thoughts, us knowing more about PTSD and stuff maybe isn't the best thing, but for war veterans to see. But it is very interesting. I think again, I think seeing the two best picture winners of 1944 and 45, I think says a lot about the times and how they were changing, just how amazingly different they are in terms of tone and story matter and all that stuff.
So let's talk about movies that are coming out on Blu-ray in the coming months. Criterion has released their lineup for
Hmm.
March, and I have seen two of these movies, and I'm really excited about especially one of them.
I don't know what you
But
mean.
yes, one of the ones I'm excited about is not one of the ones I've seen, and maybe I should save that one for you to talk about, Tim. But the one that I'm the most excited about that they're releasing is Chilly Scenes of Winter.
Hmm.
Now, this is a movie I actually already own on Blu-ray because I got it from Twilight Time before they sadly kind of went out of business. But this is a movie starring John Hurd, and it's directed by Joel Micklin Silver, who is a fantastic and underrated director. It's one of the best movies about love and also like losing love that I've ever seen. It's from the perspective of a man who is in love with a woman and they went together for a long time, but she ended up going back to her husband and he's still trying to figure out how to get her back and he just keeps trying to rekindle it over and over again. And this is a very ahead of its time movie, I would say, because I believe it came out in 1982 and they tried to force her to change the ending, but I'm glad she stuck to her guns and I will leave it at that. So that's Chilly Scenes of Winter coming to Criterion. And then another one I'm excited about on the Criterion collection is Mildred Pierce coming out in 4K. So
And yes, Nora, if you're listening, we'll cover it with you at some point.
heck yeah, we
Hold your
will.
horses.
I'm very excited about this version in particular because obviously 4K is exciting, even though I don't have a way to watch 4K just yet, but I'm sure I will at some point. But this one is cool because it has a Q&A with Anne Blythe, and
I thought
it
you were going
is
to say Joe
also,
Crawford for a second.
oh, that would be amazing. There is a documentary about her on this as well, but there's a Q&A with Anne Blythe and Eddie Meller is the person that's conducting that Q&A. And I love Eddie. He's a great presenter on TCM. And of course, he hosts the Film Noir Fests that I go to on a yearly basis. So that should be a really cool feature. And then another movie that it's been on my list, as I've mentioned many times. I have a list of, a spreadsheet of all the movies that should be coming out on Criterion or some sort of specialty label. I'm finally getting my wish on one that has been on there for almost as long as my list has existed. And that is dun dun dun, dun Just Another Girl on the IRT, which is coming to Paramount Home Media Distribution. It is going to be out in February, actually coming out on Valentine's Day. So this is a movie that came out in the 90s. I've talked about it before, and it's about a teenage girl who is off to college, or so it seems. She's like in high school, but she's taking honors classes, doing really well. And then she meets a cute guy, and they do things they probably maybe shouldn't. And then she gets pregnant, but she doesn't want to tell anybody. And so things get complicated from there. It's a great movie. It's a really good coming of age movie. It's got a great performance in it, and Leslie Harris really just directs the hell out of it. So if you haven't seen it, you'll finally have a chance to. It's been out of print for many years, even though it occasionally would pop up on Criterion Channel to watch. I'm so excited that this is getting a proper release.
So I have a few things I would want to highlight. I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention I think last time last episode, if you watched that, ran a bit long, so we didn't really have time to go over much in terms of companies up. So I think we missed the February announcements for Criterion, and I just want to mention a few of those. One, they are releasing. I think they had already released on DVD and Blu-ray, but they're releasing, I think, a 4K of the Three Colors trilogy, and then they're doing a version of Romeo and Juliet, the version you're probably thinking of when I say Romeo and Juliet.
Not with Leo.
Yeah, not the Leo one.
The
Not the
Zeffirelli film.
Yes. And then I think again this is an upgrade. I think they had released this on Blu-ray and DVD before. No, I think it's 4K of Dazed and Confused by Richard Linklater, one of his early and kind of big film that helped him a lot in his career. And then a film that I have not seen from a director writer who I've seen very little of, oddly enough, but this might be my excuse to finally see more of his stuff. From Robert Townsend, there's Hollywood Shuffle, which I know really
I
nothing.
love that movie. We might have to talk about that one sometime.
Yes. And then finally, for the last I would mention from Criterion anyway, is there was rumblings that Criterion was going to release this and stuff. I was hoping somebody, boutique label, would release it so we would be more justified in covering it, which we will, because it is David Lynch's Inland Empire from 2006, I think. And it's as of right now, as of this recording, it's the last feature film that he directed, unless you count Twin Peaks: The Return. But in terms of non-Criterion stuff, I don't know. I think they might have released a version of this before, but Shout Factory, at the very least, is doing a new 4K version of, I think, probably the best movie ever made, and that was, of course, Bubba Hotep, with the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Bruce Campbell in a film that is Elvis fighting undead or whatever, which is a flawed film, but as fun as you might think it is. Also touching on deeper stuff about legacy and family and all that stuff. So fun film, and there's also some special versions of it with posters and fun little stuff. I know the 4K of it is coming out February 7th. And then also a new one I think Shout Factory had done also another version of, but now is releasing in 4K. The wonderful, probably one of the best, I don't know about the best, maybe the best animated film I've ever seen, Kubo and the Two Strings. Before we wrap up, we're going to give you a little preview over the next few months. In January, we're going to continue our look at the Japanese director Ozu with 3 more of his silent films. I Was Born But from 1932, Dragnet Girl from 1933, and Passing Fancy, also from 1933. And then in February, usually we try to get something for Black History Month. I think this year we're just going to kind of call it a little bit early. Rosalie's going to come up with the topic, which we'll have ready for you by the time we do the next episode. And then in March, I am excited to announce we're going to do, some people might remember back in April of this year, we did a kind of a special episode called Outside the Boutique, where we talked about 4 Brendan Fraser films in that case, that as of right now are not part of any boutique label. Well, we're going to return to that special episode with a special look at the 3 live-action Ninja Turtles films from the 90s, which I'm very excited to talk about. And unless he decides to change his mind, we will have a special guest for that. Rosalie's partner in crime, Andy, will join us again for that, unless something comes up. As you remember, we also talked with him when we talked about a similarly topic episode when we talked about 2 Bruce Lee films. So very excited to have him back on for that. But in the meantime, you can find me on, as of right now, we'll see if it keeps being the case, on Twitter at CinemaPackRat, where you can find links to my YouTube channel.
And you can find me on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis. I also write for fthismovie.com and occasionally pop up on various other podcasts. So see my Twitter for that as well. And I believe I'll be posting my end of year lists on F This Movie probably the first week of January or so, where I'll talk about my favorite movies of 2022 and also my favorite discoveries of 2022. So more to come on that.
But why don't you prepare to dive back in, or travel back to Japan, I should say, with some, again, early silent films from one of the most acclaimed Japanese directors, Ozu, and we will see you then.